I thought I had the perfect life. A loving wife, a beautiful daughter, and a best friend I could trust with anything. But one night, a single message on my wife's laptop changed everything. Years of lies, hidden affairs, and a betrayal so deep it shattered my world. They thought I wouldn't find out. They thought they'd get away with it. But what they didn't know was that I was already planning my revenge. And when I struck, I made sure they lost everything. The dim glow of the classroom lights cast long shadows over the stacks of essays littering his desk. Ethan Carter rubbed his tired eyes, forcing himself to focus on the final few papers that needed grading. The ticking clock on the wall seemed to mock him. 10:12 p.m. He had stayed far later than intended. By now, his wife Lauren was probably wondering where he was. He let out a heavy sigh, stretching his sore shoulders. Just a few more, he told himself. His coffee, long gone cold, did little to ease his fatigue. As he reached for his laptop to input final scores, the screen flickered and died. The battery had given out completely. Frustration gnawed at him, but he forced himself to remain calm. There was no fixing it now. Packing up his things, he stepped into the empty hallway, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the deserted school building. The drive home was a blur, his thoughts consumed by the unfinished work still waiting for him. If he wanted to return the essays tomorrow as promised, he would have to finish them tonight. The house was dark when he arrived. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound greeting him. A handwritten note sat on the kitchen counter. Working late. Leftovers in the fridge. Love you. A small smile touched his lips, though it quickly faded under the weight of guilt. He had been so caught up in work lately, neglecting time with Lauren. He made a mental note to make it up to her. Reheating a plate of lasagna, he made his way to the home office. His own laptop was dead, but Lauren's sleek silver one sat on the desk, untouched. She wouldn't mind if he borrowed it. He had used it before for quick things. The laptop powered on with a soft chime. As it loaded, he took a bite of lasagna, savoring the warmth of the meal. His focus was on logging into his cloud storage when a notification popped up in the corner of the screen. A message. Can't wait to see you tomorrow, baby. Hotels booked, same place as last time. The fork slipped from his fingers, clattering onto the plate. His mind struggled to process what he had just read. The sender's name appeared bold and unmistakable. Jason. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. Jason, his best friend. His closest confidant for years. The words on the screen blurred as disbelief clouded his mind. His breathing grew shallow as he hesitantly scrolled up through the chat history. Each message unraveled another piece of the deception. Lauren. Miss you already. Last night was amazing. Jason. You're incredible. I can't get enough of you. Lauren, we need to be more careful. Ethan almost saw the messages last week. The words burned into his brain, searing with each new revelation. Years. The messages stretched back years. His wife, his best friend. Together, behind his back, lying to his face. Business trips she had taken. Late nights she had excused. Romantic getaways, Ethan had never questioned them before. A hollow, bitter laugh escaped him. A history teacher, yet he had been blind to the most important history unfolding in his own home. His trembling fingers minimized the chat window, but his need for the truth had already taken hold. He wasn't done. He couldn't be. Digging deeper, he found a hidden folder within her work files. Inside, hundreds of photos filled the screen. Lauren and Jason in intimate embraces, posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, wrapped in each other's arms on a beach at sunset, smiling, happy, happier than she had ever seemed with him. Each click unearthed more evidence. Credit card statements revealing lavish dinners, expensive gifts, and five-star hotels all carefully hidden from him. And then, buried beneath layers of documents, he found something that turned his stomach. Private medical record. A cryptic reference to a paternity test. His vision blurred. His hands clenched into fists as an unbearable thought took root in his mind. His daughter, the little girl he had held as a newborn, rocked to sleep night after night, taught to ride a bike. She might not be his. For what felt like hours, he sat frozen, staring at the screen as his world shattered around him. Every moment, every memory, tainted. When the first wave of shock faded, something else took its place. Cold, calculated anger. Pain had no place here. Grief wouldn't save him. He was a historian, and history had taught him one thing. Those who planned ahead always had the advantage. With steady hands, he began gathering evidence. Screenshots, files, saved messages, all methodically copied and stored. He backed up everything onto an encrypted drive, ensuring that nothing could be erased. By the time he heard Lauren's car pulling into the driveway, his mind had already begun formulating a plan. Quickly, he closed all windows, erased his digital footprints, and shut the laptop. He moved to the bedroom, feigning exhaustion, while his mind worked tirelessly. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. Ethan lay in bed, his back turned to Lauren as she settled in beside him. His breathing remained steady, controlled, every movement calculated. She sighed softly, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. She had no idea he knew. His eyes remained open long after she drifted into sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the weight of his discovery pressing down on him like an anchor. Every fiber of his being urged him to wake her, to demand an explanation, to scream in her face for betraying him. But he resisted. Anger was useless without a plan. By morning, his mind had cleared enough to begin thinking logically. There were too many unknowns. How long had she been lying? Was their daughter truly his? And how deep did Jason's involvement go? The first step was control. As Lauren hummed to herself in the kitchen, preparing breakfast like any other day, Ethan sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone. The digital forensics courses he had once taken out of curiosity were now coming back to him in sharp detail. He could use everything he knew against them, but only if he was careful. Lauren kissed him on the cheek as she set his coffee down. "You got home so late last night," she said casually. "Everything okay at school?" He forced a smile, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yeah, just a long night." She nodded, completely unaware of the deception unfolding beneath her own roof. As soon as she left for work, Ethan sprang into action. He had already backed up the chat messages and photos, but he needed more. He couldn't afford any loose ends. Logging into their shared bank account, he began piecing together the financial trail. Months of unexplained expenses lined up perfectly with Jason's frequent work trips. Hotel reservations, last-minute flights, and extravagant purchases. All of it hidden under vague transaction names. He cross-referenced timestamps with Lauren's messages. Every missing piece fell into place, revealing the full extent of their affair. But that wasn't the worst part. Buried in the depths of the financial records, he found something that sent ice through his veins. A hidden account. Lauren had been siphoning money into a separate bank account under her maiden name. Tens of thousands of dollars. Slowly over the course of years. Was she planning to leave him? Or had she simply been ensuring she could support her real family, the one she had built behind his back? The thought made him sick. He copied every financial record and stored them in a hidden folder. Then, he turned his attention back to the paternity test file. Was Emily truly his daughter? The medical document he had found was vague. It referenced a test but didn't contain results. That meant one of two things. Either Lauren had considered testing their daughter's DNA and backed out, or she had already taken the test and hidden the outcome. His heart pounded as he opened her email account. He had never been the kind of husband to invade his wife's privacy before, but the past 24 hours had changed him. Using a recovery method he had learned in digital security training, he retrieved deleted emails from her inbox, and there it was, an email from a private lab. Results available for viewing. The attachment was missing, likely deleted in panic, but it didn't matter. If she had tested Emily, then she had a reason to be unsure. And if she had deleted the results, the truth was staring him in the face. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen as his entire world continued crumbling around him. He needed proof. Checking the time, he noted that Lauren wouldn't be home for another few hours. that gave him enough time to secure what he needed. First, he purchased a paternity test kit. He didn't want Lauren knowing about it until he had the results, so he arranged for it to be delivered to a P.O. box he rarely used. Next, he reached out to a private investigator. He needed someone discreet, someone who could dig into Jason's life just as thoroughly as he had uncovered Lauren's. The investigator responded quickly. They would begin surveillance immediately. With each calculated step, Ethan felt control returning to him. He wasn't just a betrayed husband. He was a man collecting ammunition. By the time Lauren came home, Ethan had erased every trace of his activity. He greeted her with a tired smile, kissed her on the forehead, and listened to her recount the details of her long day at work. She had no idea that her husband had already started dismantling her life. Ethan had spent the last few days walking a dangerous tightrope. Every interaction with Lauren was a test of his control, every moment a performance. He smiled when necessary, laughed at the right times, and played the part of the devoted husband while secretly pulling the strings of her downfall. But now it was time to push forward. The financial evidence, the deleted emails, the secret account, it was all useful, but it wasn't enough. He needed more leverage, more control, more proof to ensure that when he finally struck, there would be no escape for her or Jason. The paternity test was already in motion. Ethan had discreetly taken a sample from Emily's toothbrush and sent it off for testing. The results would arrive within a week, and when they did, he would have an answer to the question that had been haunting him since the moment he found the email. But he couldn't just sit and wait. He had to set the stage for what was to come. To Lauren, Ethan appeared unchanged. Maybe a little tired from work, maybe a little distant, but nothing alarming. He still kissed her goodbye in the mornings, still texted her throughout the day, still curled up beside her at night. She had no idea that he had started securing his own financial safety. Every evening, when she thought he was grading papers, Ethan was discreetly siphoning his own savings into a separate account under an alias. He liquidated unnecessary assets, cashed out small portions of investments, and even converted a fraction into cryptocurrency, untouchable, untraceable. At the same time, he carefully guided Lauren deeper into his financial trap. Over dinner one night, he casually mentioned an incredible investment opportunity. A former student of his, now an entrepreneur, was launching a tech startup with massive potential. He spoke of projected earnings, of early investors tripling their returns, of how this was the chance of a lifetime. Lauren hesitated at first, but greed had always been one of her weaknesses. A few days later, she brought it up again. So, that investment opportunity you mentioned, do you really think it's worth it? Ethan played his part well, feigning uncertainty, acting as though he was hesitant to risk their savings. He let her convince him, let her believe it was her idea to invest a significant portion of their money. By the time she signed the paperwork, transferring thousands into a shell company Ethan had created, he had already cut off her access to his real savings. The social game was just as important as the financial one. Ethan needed allies, and he needed to control the narrative before Lauren or Jason could sense what was happening. He began planting subtle doubts among friends and colleagues. Over coffee with a coworker, he sighed and shook his head. Lauren has been so distant lately, he mused, his tone weary. Always working late, always on her phone. I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if she's hiding something. He never accused, never pushed too hard, he simply let the idea take root. At a family gathering, he made a passing remark about Jason's questionable business ethics. You know, he's been making some risky moves lately. I hope he's not getting himself into trouble. By the end of the night, the whispers had already started. And Jason had no idea. With the groundwork set, it was time to see how far Lauren would go to protect her secrets. One evening, as they sat on the couch, Ethan casually mentioned, I ran into Jason today. He took a sip of his drink, watching her reaction carefully. She barely flinched. Oh? How's he doing? He smiled. Good. We grabbed lunch. Talked about life, work, relationships. For the briefest second, her fingers tightened around her glass. He leaned back, stretching. You know, it's funny. He mentioned something weird. Said he'd been staying at hotels a lot lately. He turned his head to look at her. I thought that was odd, don't you? Lauren froze. It was just a moment, but Ethan saw it. The way her breathing hitched ever so slightly. The way her eyes darted to the side before she forced a casual expression. Oh, well, maybe he just needs a break from work stress. She shrugged, sipping her wine. You know Jason. He's always been a bit of a wanderer. Lies. So easy for her now. Ethan smiled and nodded. Yeah, that makes sense. But inside, he knew exactly what he had just confirmed. With every passing day, Ethan moved one step closer to the endgame. His savings were secured. His evidence was locked away in multiple locations. His social circle was beginning to turn against Lauren and Jason, without them even realizing it. And most importantly, she still believed he knew nothing. When the paternity test results arrived, everything would fall into place. And when he struck, there would be no escape. Ethan knew the moment had come. The final piece of the puzzle had arrived in the form of a single envelope, thin, unassuming, yet capable of detonating what remained of his marriage. The paternity test results sat in his hands, unopened, as he stood in his car, parked a few blocks from home. His pulse was steady, his breathing controlled. Whatever truth lay inside, he was ready for it. He tore the envelope open with deliberate slowness. The clinical wording blurred slightly before his vision adjusted, locking onto the only sentence that mattered. Probability of paternity, 0%. A strange, hollow feeling settled in his chest. He had already suspected it, had known deep down that Emily wasn't his. But seeing it confirmed on paper was something else entirely. The daughter he had loved, raised, and cherished as his own was biologically tied to Jason, not him. For a brief moment, grief threatened to overtake him. Then, as quickly as it had come, he let it go. This wasn't about sorrow anymore. This was about justice. That night, he set everything into motion. The first strike was social. Ethan had spent weeks carefully planting doubts in the minds of those closest to them. Now, all it took was a single anonymous email sent to select friends, family members, and even some of Lauren's co-workers. Attached were a few carefully chosen photos, Lauren and Jason in intimate moments from their secret trips, along with a damning set of financial records showing her siphoning money into her private account. The subject line was simple: the truth about Lauren. The effect was immediate. By the next morning, whispers had spread like wildfire. Lauren's phone buzzed endlessly with calls and texts. Concerned friends, furious family members, confused co-workers who had once admired her. The veil of secrecy had been ripped away. Ethan acted oblivious, watching from a distance as she panicked, trying to do damage control. She paced the living room, furiously texting and calling Jason, her voice cracking as she tried to explain herself. But the truth was out, and nothing she said could stop it now. Strike two was financial. Ethan had ensured that Lauren's investment in the fake tech startup had gone through before he pulled the rug out from under her. He had drained their joint account, moved his personal assets, and ensured that she was left with nothing but debt. When she tried to withdraw money, she found her accounts locked, her savings gone. She stormed into his office that evening, her face pale with panic. Ethan, something's wrong with our bank accounts. I don't understand. Everything is gone. He looked up from his desk, keeping his expression neutral. Gone? That's strange. Maybe you should check that secret account you've been hiding. Her breath hitched. The blood drained from her face as she took a step back. What? I know, Lauren, he said simply. I know about the money, the hotels, the paternity test. He let the weight of his words settle in. I know everything. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her eyes filling with tears. Ethan, No. He cut her off. You don't get to talk. Not anymore. She collapsed onto the couch, her body trembling. What are you going to do? He stared at her for a long moment before standing. I already did it. Strike three was Jason. Ethan had spent the last few weeks feeding Jason's business partners and clients information about his questionable practices. He had leaked details of fraudulent deals, sent anonymous tips to financial regulators, and, just for good measure, ensured that Jason's own wife received copies of the affair evidence. By the end of the week, Jason was drowning. His company had lost several major investors. His wife had thrown him out of their house. His personal and professional life were in free fall. Ethan took a sick satisfaction in watching it all unfold from a distance. The final blow came at a family dinner that weekend. Everyone had already heard the rumors, but Ethan decided to confirm them himself. He stood up, tapped his glass, and addressed the room. "I want to take a moment to thank Lauren and Jason," he said, his voice calm. "Not for their loyalty, of course, but for reminding me how important it is to know who you can trust." Lauren buried her face in her hands. Jason clenched his jaw, his fists tightening under the table. "And one last thing," Ethan continued, setting down his glass. "Since we're all about honesty now, I recently found out that Emily isn't my biological daughter." Gasps filled the room. Lauren let out a strangled sob. Jason looked like he had been punched in the gut. Ethan turned to Jason, locking eyes with him. "Congratulations, brother. You're a father." The dinner ended in chaos. Lauren fled, Jason chased after her, and Ethan walked out with his head held high. Everything was falling apart for them. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt free. The fallout was even worse than Ethan had anticipated. Lauren's life unraveled at an astonishing pace, each carefully placed domino falling in perfect sequence. She lost the respect of her friends, the support of her family, and any financial stability she once had. Her name was whispered in hushed tones, not just as the woman who had betrayed her husband, but as someone who had gambled and lost everything. Jason wasn't faring any better. His business was collapsing under the weight of multiple financial investigations, and his personal life was in ruins. His wife had filed for divorce, stripping him of his home, and the paternity revelation had made him a pariah among their family. He no longer had a place in the life he had built, and Ethan relished every moment of his downfall. Ethan, however, was already moving forward. He had filed for divorce the morning after the family dinner, wasting no time in ensuring a clean break. With the financial evidence stacked against her, Lauren had no leverage to negotiate a better deal. Her secret bank account had been drained. The fake investment had left her with nothing but debt, and her reputation was beyond repair. The courts ruled overwhelmingly in Ethan's favor. He got the house. He got the car. He got full financial independence. Lauren, on the other hand, walked away with nothing but shattered pride and a life she had to rebuild from scratch. Ethan had won. But even as his revenge reached its final stage, he found himself thinking about Emily. He had raised her, loved her as his own. The knowledge that she wasn't biologically his didn't change the memories they had shared. He had made his decision. He wouldn't abandon her. During the custody proceedings, he made his intentions clear. "I want Emily to have stability," he told the judge. "Despite the circumstances, I will continue to be present in her life. She shouldn't suffer for the mistakes of others." It was the final nail in Lauren and Jason's coffin. Jason was already drowning in legal and financial battles. He couldn't fight for custody even if he wanted to. Lauren, desperate for any lifeline, tried to argue that she should maintain primary custody, but her reputation and financial instability worked against her. The court granted Ethan shared custody, with him maintaining the majority of the parental decision-making. He had succeeded in taking everything from them, but Emily would still have a father figure who truly cared for her. With his old life burned to ashes, Ethan stepped into a new future. He quit his job, deciding to finally do something for himself. For years, he had buried himself in grading papers and managing students' futures, all while his own life had been crumbling beneath him. Now it was time to build something real. Using the knowledge and experience he had gained throughout his ordeal, he wrote a book. Not a bitter tell-all memoir, but a story of rebuilding, of self-respect, of rising from betrayal. The publishing world took notice. His name became associated with resilience, wisdom, and strength. He was invited to speaking engagements, interviews, and even television segments discussing the psychology of betrayal and personal reinvention. The irony was almost poetic. Lauren and Jason had tried to tear him down, but in the end, they had only made him stronger. One afternoon, as he packed up the last few things from his old house before selling it, he received an unexpected message. It was from Lauren. "I know I don't deserve it, but I just wanted to say I'm sorry for everything." He stared at the screen for a long moment, then simply deleted the message without responding. Some people don't deserve a second chance. As he boarded a flight to his new home, leaving behind the ruins of his past, Ethan took one last look at the city below. He had won. Not just against Lauren, not just against Jason, but against the worst version of himself. And that was the greatest revenge of all.